Well, in today's video, we're going to dive into some old mines that I didn't even know were out there, show you that technology I've used to find those mines, and hopefully it can help some of you, at least here in Oregon, find some of these old mines, and some of our other Memorial Day weekend adventures. Well, first of all, welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a few weeks since we've got a video put out. I've had several emails asking what the heck happened to you. We've just been busy. But we did get a chance to take our new trailer out for, I think, the third trip out. The first two trips, I broke something both times on that trailer. This time, I think we finally made it home without breaking something. The other two times were not the trailer's fault. But that's another story. I'll explain that on another video. But we did a little adventure over the weekend. We went up in the kind of the Sumter, Whitney, Oregon country and camped. We didn't want to get too close to Sumter because Memorial Day weekend, it's usually pretty crazy. There's a big flea market up there. We didn't know how the turnout, last year it was canceled, so we didn't know how the turnout was going to be this year. And one day we decided to drive over and take a look. And this is what we saw. As you can see, it was wall-to-wall people. Everybody's tired of being cooped up. Everybody's out and about. The whole time we were there, I think I wasn't paying attention. I was looking when we first showed up for people wearing masks. But I gave up looking. My wife, she was a little more studious about this, and she spotted 3 or 4 people wearing masks. So I'm not trying to make a political statement about it, but everybody's tired of the whole mask thing. I think it's way overhyped, and it's really, in my personal opinion, it doesn't do anything to protect anybody. So that's my 2 cents on it. But it was really good to see that the Sumter Flea Market was up in operation. Not as many vendors were there this year as some of the previous years, but it was good to see what was there and all the people out and about enjoying themselves. So after that, we went and adventured around looking for some mines that I used the LIDAR program from the Oregon Department of Geology to find these. I'm going to take you through a quick run through on these real quick, actually looking at these 2 mines that we're going to look at and how I found. Now, I think I've mentioned this page or this resource before, but we're going to go over it real quick. This is the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries webpage, or DGAMI. They have this nice LIDAR section in there. They've also got a lot of info on old mines in their historic section. But let's jump into this LIDAR section real quick. Now, they don't have all of Oregon covered yet, but they do have a lot of the areas that have some mining activity. Most of the west side of Oregon's already done. The east side's a little slower. Hopefully the rest of the eastern Oregon area that has mines will be done here in the next year or 2, hopefully. But let's jump into this page. As you can see, this is the homepage for the LIDAR section. The part you want is here at the LIDAR data viewer. It's an interactive map that comes up. And as you can see, we're zoomed quite a ways out here. And this is what defaults to this. It's showing you the downloadable data. I usually switch that off and just go to the bare earth hillside. We'll zoom in here. Again, it's kind of odd, the areas that some of this is covered, like around Baker City. Some of the Elkhorn Mountains are covered, like Upper Rock Creek is covered. Some of this is covered, but there's other areas that they didn't cover yet. But fortunately, what the area I was interested in was this area up by Whitney. There's a lot of mining activity right in this area. There's a whole bunch of mining activity that's in the past has happened here. And I think there's a few guys still prospecting, small-scale mining in that area. Unfortunately, when I reopened this page, it lost my pins for everything I had marked. That's one thing really nice about this. Let's find a spot that we want to look at. Okay. So here's one of the areas that caught my attention. I was just, before we went up for the Memorial Day weekend, I decided, hey, let's pick a couple mines. Let's look on the LIDAR and see if there's something out there I don't know about. And I found a couple by this right here. This area, I had no idea what this was. You know, it's obviously a placer operation of some kind. You can tell there was another one here, but it doesn't show up on any maps. I've never seen it on any topo maps or any other map. I've never seen these particular things listed. So this thing's really nice. You can left click, and then come over here and add a marker. And on that marker, you can copy this lat and long off of here and come over here to Google Earth, which I've already done. I've already put this place mark here. And you can zoom in, you know, and see, well, what the heck is this? What am I looking at here? And let me take that mark off there real quick. And as you can see, here's those placer workings right in there. And lo and behold, it looked like there was something there, maybe a little cabin or something. So that really piqued my interest. So this is one of the spots that we decided we need to go look at this. Unfortunately, if you look at a topo map, there are no roads listed in this area. On Google Earth, you know, I couldn't spot any roads that went in there. The nearest road, the major road here up Camp Creek, is right there. There's another little road somewhere down in this draw, but I couldn't find anything real close to it. So I thought, well, okay, well, if worst case, we'll have to walk in there. But we got fairly close. We got up in this area with the side by side. But here's what we found. So that was the cabin and that placer workings. That was really interesting to see. I'd love to go in there and prospect that area some more. Another interesting thing about that, we found this sign there real close to the cabin. And this is a very old Forest Service sign marking a property boundary. And the research I've been able to do on this, it looked like that property was once owned by a timber company. And in the I think it was the 1930s, they traded it back to the Forest Service for another piece of land. So that's an old sign. I'm pretty sure it was either 30 or 34 that property was traded. So that's a really old sign. So that was really interesting to see. But there's no records on that mine that I can find anywhere. But it did look like a fairly decent operation in there. I took a couple samples out of a bank. There was a few little specks of gold, nothing to get too excited about. But as I'm looking at this right here, let me get rid of this pin. You know, what this looks like to me was there was an old river channel or stream channel right in there that they just happened to hit. And I don't know if this upper end, let's zoom in here. I don't know if this upper end of this, they just ran out of material, or where they hit a wall. Maybe this was a waterfall in here at one time. This side over here, you could tell pretty easily from the footage that the bedrock come up right there, so there wasn't a lot of material to wash. But it makes me wonder out in here if there's something else that could be found, you know, or even over in this other draw, some other ancient river channel or something in there that might be worth prospecting. So this LIDAR program can really help you with your prospecting. I want to go back in there and do a little more exploring. Now, the other thing about this, once you're on the ground up there and looking around, you know, Google Earth will tell you a little bit, but not a lot. Until you get your feet on the ground, it's really hard to tell what you're looking at geology-wise. Now, this area right about here, from here on down, this is all basalt, complete basalt all through this. Probably not any gold in it. Most of the basalt in this area is much younger than everything else. So it's probably covering up some good ground, but those flows probably don't have anything worth looking at really. And up above here, not far away, and probably up in about this area right here, there's another basalt flow. So this is just one little exposed area right in here. And I'm not really sure. I didn't have a lot of time to go explore anymore, but I see a little bit of diggings over here on the LIDAR. You know, they were obviously looking for another channel or something there. But again, there's basalt flows up in here and down in here. This just happens to be one area that's either didn't get covered in basalt flow, or it had been eroded away at some point. Now, just off over here, not too far away, is, let's get to, right over here is the Bonanza Mine, a pretty big mine up in that area. So, you know, this isn't a too terrible distance away, and this whole area's got lots of quartz in it. Anyway, this ditch line, I started following it after I found this mine. I started following the ditch line around, and it looks like it was fed from one of these other ditches, and I had no idea all these ditches were up in this area. I knew of one or two, but I didn't realize how many old ditches are up in this area. As you can see here on this shot, there's just little ditches dug all over these hillsides. And I was following this ditch around, and I noticed, well, what the heck happened here? Did they cover that back in? And then if you look a little closer, no, it looks like there's a ditch there. I've been on this road several times. First of all, I had no idea that ditch was there. Second, again, because I didn't know the ditch was there, I had no idea that there was a little tunnel dug through the hillside right here. Now, what makes this really interesting, we went up and looked at this, and what makes this so interesting is this is a fairly low spot in this saddle anyway, and it makes me wonder if this was a screw-up or a planned tunnel. Like, did they plan on that ditch actually going through that little saddle, and they messed up somewhere along the way or encountered obstacles and had to lower it down some? It's probably only maybe 8 to 10 feet from the top of that, or from that saddle. And it made me wonder, did these guys plan this little tunnel, or is it just one of those things that just, oh, well, we know we're coming in low, we're just going to dig a tunnel through here. And the reason they didn't just go around the end of this point, I walked this out a little bit, they would have had to come out here quite a ways to get around this point. And this is just terrible, nasty, rocky material that they would have had to dug through. It doesn't look that way from Google Earth or here on the LIDAR, but it's just terrible ground that they would have had to dig through to dig that ditch around there. So this little tunnel they dug, even though it was collapsed in for the most part, you could see back in there a little bit. The other end was collapsed, so you couldn't walk through it, but it was still really interesting to see. Because, you know, it's just part of that history that's getting lost. Had no idea this was even up there, so it was really fun to find this. So the other mine we stopped and looked at, we stopped and looked at a couple other little mines, but the ones I'm going to mention in this video was this one. I think I've seen this on a topo map before, but I don't always believe that the mine's actually there on some of these topo maps. Some of them mark a mine that's not even there. Some of them, topo maps, there's a lot of mines that are there and the topo maps don't show them as well. But I was skimming around here on the LIDAR, as actually looking for rail beds is what I was looking for from the old Sumter Valley Railroad. And I stumbled across this and I was like, hey, that looks like some digging there. I can't tell if it's a mine or not. So we went there and looked, and here's what we found. It was a small vertical shaft. I would estimate it goes down maybe 100 feet from the waste rock pile, maybe a little more, maybe not as far if it had some drifts off to the side of it. It's really hard to tell. It was full of water, but it is open, which surprised me because the way the trees are grown up in the road that goes in there, I would bet this hasn't been worked since probably the 1920s or 30s, but it was open. I took the metal detector on the hillside above it. There's another little spot you can see right here on the LIDAR. I don't know if that was actually a shaft or just a prospect. It's so slumped in, it's pretty hard to tell. But I took the metal detector and I got a really good hit in one spot and I started digging. I dug almost 2 feet down there. And what I wound up digging into was fault gouge. And if you don't know what fault gouge is, that's where two plates or a fault line is moved. A lot of times in between there'll be this clayish or really fine ground material. In this case, it was very clayish. In fact, I took some of it back to pan because I really couldn't find what it was hitting on. It was hitting on that fault gouge material. I took a little bit back to pan, and it might have been loaded with gold. I have no idea because this stuff was so terrible to try and pan. I've never seen clay as sticky and nasty and did not want to break apart like that stuff. Now, I've ran some clay material in the past when I've been mining through my little trommel. It's enough of a pain to deal with. But this stuff, I don't know how in the world you'd ever work that stuff, even if it had a ton of gold in it. Maybe dry it out and crush it, but I would bet as soon as it gets a little water mixed back in with it, it's going to be back to the same, just clumped back together. That stuff was terrible to deal with. But neat little mine stuck back there, not far off the main road. Had no idea it was there. Would have probably never looked at it had I not used this LIDAR program. Now, there's one other thing I want to show you real quick here. This spot that I'd found on the LIDAR, I was just cruising along here about like this and spotted this. Like, well, that's obviously not a normal. Either there's a meteor there or there's a mine there. So we went and looked at this. This was a neat, just little mom and pop mine probably at some point. Obviously, they hit a little quartz vein there. You could find a little bit of quartz laying around on the ground. There was an old hood here off of, I'm guessing a Ford truck of some kind. I don't know what the heck they repurposed it for, but old miners repurposed everything. A lot of new miners, unless they've got a ton of money, they repurpose everything as well. And so this was a nice little mine to stumble across. Obviously not a lot left there. Now this was right above something I've seen on a map for years, and I didn't know what it was. I finally did a little research. It's called Clifford, and it sits here on the LIDAR map. You can see where all these junctions meet. There looked like maybe a rail bed here from, it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm pretty sure this was part of a rail bed. But there was a junction of many roads and this little site called Clifford. Well, I did a little research, and turns out that was a stage top along between Sumter and I think it was Prairie City. They probably stopped at some of the mining camps as well, probably Greenhorn. But it was the kind of intermediate stop there, and there was a little town site there at one time. And it kind of vanished after they built the railroad and Whitney came into being. That kind of became the center of activity. They built a fairly large mill there, and the rail system come in, the Sumter Valley Railroad come in there. And so this little town just kind of vanished. So we walked around here. There's not a ton of material left or items left to even indicate there was a town there. We had to look pretty hard to find any amount of anything left. Just bits and pieces of metal here and there, little pieces of glass. Found the area what looked like their dump. But other than that, this is just fading into history. This, before long, you know, another 50 years, that most of that metal will probably be rusted away into nothing. So this place is going to be a memory. But there's beautiful views from this town site. I think back to what it would have been like to be one of these folks living in this little town site. Wake up every morning to this nice little meadow, mountains all around. Now in the winter, I'm sure it was a different story. But what a beautiful location. And I wondered at first, where in the world did these people get their water from? And I thought, well, maybe this old, what I thought was a mine up here was maybe a well instead. But no, it's definitely quartz around it. So that was a mine. But further up the draw, right up in this area, maybe it's right here, there's a pretty good spring coming out. Now, I don't know if they piped that water down or what they did, but there is a pretty good spring up in there. So that's probably where the town got its water from. Or maybe they sank a little well in the town. You know, it's really hard to tell. But it would explain why there's so many different old road beds here. That was a town at one time, and it was a stage stop. From what little information I can find, it sounds like the stage went, like I said, from Sumter to Prairie City, and from here up to the Greenhorn area and probably the Bonanza Mine. The railroad come in, I think, into this area about 1906, I want to say. So this was well before that. So really interesting little piece of history there. Well, guys, I think that's about going to wrap it up for this video. Just wanted to take you along on these little adventures we took. Wanted to show you how I found these places. This LIDAR program is a pretty cool program with all the other crazy politics in Oregon that I just despise. Love this program. Hope they keep it up. Hope they get the funding to get the rest of the state covered in this. It really helps trying to find these old historic sites, old rail beds. By the way, we camped, with the spot we camped, I was like, man, this, I got to looking around. I was like, this kind of looks like an old rail bed. Sure enough, took the metal detector out. They left some old spikes behind. So that was pretty cool to figure out we were actually camped on a rail bed. And another little tidbit of information, these old rail beds from the Sumter Valley Railroad, these little spur lines that went off for the logging, it doesn't look like they used hardly any gravel or any gravel at all in between the ties. I think they just laid them down, did their logging operation, and pulled it all back up probably a year later and moved it to a new location. So they didn't bother hauling gravel and all that baloney in. It looks like they just put the rail down and away they went. Now, there was a little piece of rail left over right above where we were camping. That was cool, pretty cool to see that. That's kind of what clued me into that might be a rail bed. But you never know. Old timers, old miners, they would get a hold of rail and use it for all kinds of stuff. So I didn't know if it was a leftover piece from some mining operation that they'd reused it for something. But after taking the metal detector out and found a couple spikes in the ground, I'm like, yep, this was an old rail bed. Anyway, that's enough for today. I've got some more videos planned. In fact, I think I'm going out tomorrow to look at a couple other mines, hopefully get underground a little bit. So stay tuned for that video, and we'll see you guys on the next video. Subscribe, like, all that good stuff. Okay, we'll see you next video.